I still remember the sound the tires made when the van stopped, that long, dry groan against the gravel that doesn't belong to any place you can call home. It was barely 6 a.m., and the desert still held on to its last breath of night. My son Miguelito was asleep with his head on my lap, his small hand clutching the corner of my sweater. I thought, if I don't move, maybe this moment won't either. Then came the voice from outside, sharp but not cruel. "Step out of the vehicle, please." The driver froze, then looked at me in the rearview mirror. "Lo siento, señora," he whispered. I didn't answer. I already knew what he meant. Sorry doesn't mean much at the border. It's just another word that stays on one side of the fence. I woke Miguelito softly. "Mi amor, open your eyes." He blinked at the light leaking through the cracks of the van door. "Are we there?" "Yes," I said, though the word trembled. "We're somewhere." When we stepped out, the air was colder than I expected. A line of agents in uniform stood waiting, faceless under their sunglasses, but human all the same. The desert wind tugged at their jackets like even the earth wanted to question what we were doing there. "Identification," one of them said. I handed over the folder I'd kept pressed against my chest since we left El Paso. The birth certificate, the expired visa, the medical papers, the school records, all the proof that my life had been real on both sides of a line someone else drew. The agent flipped through them without looking up. "Where are you headed?" "Back to San Antonio," I said quickly. "My son is in school there. We just went to visit my sister in Juarez." "Ma'am, your visa expired 3 months ago." "I know," I whispered. "I filed for renewal." He sighed, like someone repeating a story that never ends. "You'll need to come with us for processing." Processing. Such a clean word for what comes next. They led us to a building. That looked like every other government building. Gray walls, metal benches, the smell of air conditioning and paperwork. A television played the news with no sound, as if even the voices on the screen were detained. Miguelito sat beside me, clutching his small backpack. His eyes darted around the room, at the officers, the crying women, the flickering light above the desk. "Mama, are we in trouble?" I smiled, though my lips hurt. "No, mi amor. We're just waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For someone to understand." He leaned his head on my shoulder and whispered, "Then they will, because you always explain things good." I wanted to believe him. Children have this dangerous talent of believing that truth is enough. Hours passed like they do in hospitals and police stations, slow but uncertain. They took my fingerprints, then my photo, then my papers again. Each time they said, "Just a moment," and each moment turned into an hour. By noon, a woman in a dark blue uniform called my name. "Lucia Ramirez." I stood, holding Miguelito's hand tight. She guided us down a corridor that smelled of bleach and cold metal. "You'll be transferred to a holding room until we verify your case," she said, not unkindly. "How long will that take?" I asked. She hesitated. "Could be a few hours. Could be a few days." Miguelito squeezed my hand. "Days?" I smiled at him again, this time smaller. "Then we'll count them together." The officer stopped at a door with a glass window and tapped her ID card on a panel. The lock clicked like a gun being reloaded. Inside, rows of plastic chairs filled a small room. A few women sat with children, their faces wrapped in the same thin layer of exhaustion. "Sit tight," she said. "Someone will talk to you soon, but soon never means soon in these places." By the time the fluorescent lights flickered on, I had already counted the cracks in the wall and memorized the hum of the air vent. A toddler cried in the corner. Another woman, maybe in her 40s, rocked the child while whispering a lullaby too old for this room. Miguelito took out a crumpled notebook from his backpack. "Can I draw?" "Yes," I said. "Draw something beautiful." He began sketching. The house we used to have in Chihuahua, the blue door, the mango tree in the yard, the little dog who barked at everyone but never bit. He even drew his father, though the man hadn't been in our lives since Miguelito turned 2. When he finished, he said, "Can I write something too?" "Of course." He bent over the page, tongue pressed between his teeth, concentrating like he was writing a prayer. I didn't ask what it was. I didn't need to. When he folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket, I thought it was just another drawing. I didn't know it would become the thing that changed everything. Around midnight, an officer came to call names. Some women left, others arrived. No one explained much. When they finally called mine again, I stood, pulling Miguelito close. The officer, a tall man with tired eyes, looked at the tablet in his hand. Lucia Ramirez, Mexican national, 1 minor. You've been scheduled for deportation at 10 a.m. tomorrow. My knees almost gave out. Tomorrow? But I filed for renewal. I have family, a job. He looked up, not unkind, but unmoved. You can appeal, but it'll take weeks. You'll be transferred to El Paso until your case is processed. My son was born there, I said, desperation leaking through my voice. He's American, the man nodded. Then he can stay. You'll be escorted back. Miguelito's hand tightened around mine. No, he cried. I'm not staying without her. The officer sighed. Ma'am, I'm sorry. It's the law. I felt something in me break. That quiet part of a mother's heart that never fully heals after birth, but learns to bend instead. Then I'll stay with him, I whispered. Whatever it takes. The man hesitated. He looked like someone who wanted to say more, but couldn't. You'll have to speak with Officer Hayes in the morning, he said. He's in charge of deportation assignments. Maybe he can review your case. The name meant nothing to me then. It would soon mean everything. They led us to a smaller holding cell that night. The walls were painted a color that wanted to be white but gave up halfway. Miguelito curled up beside me on a thin mattress. Will they let us go, Mama? He asked, his voice muffled by the blanket. I brushed his hair back. Maybe someone will read the truth and understand. Like in the stories you tell me? Yes, just like that. He nodded, sleepy. Then I'll write another one. Tomorrow. And before I could ask, he was already, dreaming, his small hand still clutching the folded paper he'd written earlier. I closed my eyes, praying silently, not for miracles, but for mercy. Because at the border, mercy is the rarest form of proof. When dawn came, the guards began their rounds. I barely slept. My heart beat so fast it felt like it wanted to cross the line without me. They called us out one by one. The officer from the night before stopped in front of me. Hayes will see you next, he said. I picked up Miguelito, still half asleep, and followed him through a corridor filled with fluorescent light and echoes of footsteps. As the door opened to the main office, I saw a man sitting behind a metal desk, papers stacked in uneven piles, his badge catching the early sun through the window. He looked up. His eyes were tired but kind, the kind that had seen too much to pretend anymore. Mrs. Ramirez, he said softly, please, sit down. And in that moment, I didn't know if I was meeting my judge or my salvation. They always call it a room, as if naming a place small makes the fear behave, but detention isn't what. A room, it's a weather system. It fills your lungs and decides how hard your heart has to push to stay on beat. The morning swallowed us in fluorescent light and the smell of hot dust, coffee burned thin, and the cold, metallic patience of guards who have learned to live without clocks. Officer Hayes said my name softly, not like a test, but like a reminder. I still had one, and motioned for me to sit. And while his eyes looked like they belonged to a man who had run out of excuses, his hands were careful, as if every paper he touched might bruise. He asked me to tell my story from the beginning which never stays put. Is it the day I crossed with a suitcase and a sentence I thought would carry me, or the day Miguelito learned to spell tomorrow because I used it too often, or the day a factory closed and the landlord did not? I told him the shorter version that fits between sips of water, about the cashier job in San Antonio and the old woman who paid in coins and blessings, about the night shift cleaning, rooms that smelled like someone else's money, about the expired visa and the renewal that moved like a turtle toward a finish line no one had painted. And when I ran out of voice, he ran out of questions for the moment and nodded, and I couldn't tell whether the nod meant I hear you or I know this dance. He took our file, stamped something that sounded like a door closing somewhere far away, and said, You'll be returned to holding. I need to review your docket before I can make any recommendation. A recommendation is a small word that wants to be a raft. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. We walked back through the corridor that learns every detainee's footsteps, past a poster about rights that looked like a menu at a restaurant that had run out of food. Miguelito's hand was a bird inside mine, restless, warm, not willing to be still. In the larger holding area, the air hummed with the low music of worry. A woman murmuring a prayer into a crocheted scarf, another counting bills that weren't enough. A teenager staring at the corner like there might be a door there only she could see. A guard told me to sit over there, which is a direction that never needs a finger when all the chairs look alike. The plastic made a sound like apology as I lowered myself. Miguelito climbed beside me, took out his little notebook again, and sharpened a pencil with his teeth like a soldier preparing the only weapon he is allowed to carry. "Can I write him now?" He whispered. "Who?" "The man who decides." His certainty stunned me. Children assume every story still has a narrator willing to listen. I looked toward the office where Hayes had been. The door closed now, a rectangle of light around it like a halo assigned by a tired electrician. "Be careful," I whispered back. "If you write like the paper is a window and not a wall." He nodded with the seriousness boys borrow from fathers, even when their fathers are absent, and hunched over the page. And I looked away because privacy is a kind of courage, too. Beside us, a woman with hair like a dark storm watched me without pretending not to. "I'm Carla," she said, and her Spanish came from the mountains, soft on the consonants, fierce on the truth. "First time?" I laughed once, the kind of laugh that takes nothing with it. "First time this year," I said. "You?" "Third," she answered, and the word didn't sound like failure in her mouth. It sounded like survival. She nodded at Miguelito's notebook. "He writes like a person who knows what he wants to keep." "He writes like a person who learned waiting has more letters than hope," I said, and she grinned at that, a quick flash of teeth that made the room feel less like it intended to win. Someone passed a styrofoam cup of water down the row like a sacrament. The guard at the door pretended not to see. In detention, small kindness always has a lookout. Miguelito finished his page and folded it carefully, then refolded it into a smaller square, then looked at me, proud and terrified at once. "Can I give it to him, Mama?" "Not now," I said, glad there was at least one rule I could enforce that might protect something. "It will find him when it needs to." He frowned in the way that makes a mother want to give the world a different shape and pressed the folded paper against his chest like a second heart. Time moved like bread rising without heat, stubborn, unpromising. A TV in the corner blinked between weather and commercials for trucks that could climb mountains no one in this room would ever own. A little girl asked every 10 minutes if they were calling her father yet, and her mother said soon, with the voice of a person breaking a promise that was not hers. I closed my eyes. But closing your eyes in places like this only makes the walls you remember more bright. I saw my mother's kitchen in Chihuahua, steam from simmering beans fogging the single window, the halting way she would say my name whenever she needed me to be brave. Lucia, like a prayer followed by a dare. I saw the afternoon I crossed the first time, the river lower than the stories promised, the coyote's breath smelling like mint gum and gun oil. The way the night told us to be quiet, and we obeyed because we had no language to negotiate with darkness. Somewhere behind my eyelids, my present knocked on the door and asked to be let back in. "Ramirez?" A guard called, a question disguised as a name. I stood on legs that had already left the building 3 times and followed him, bringing Carla's glance with me like a blessing. "A review," the guard said, and the word sounded like an echo. They took us to a smaller interview booth with a glass front, a metal table, 2 chairs bolted as if hope might try to run. A woman from legal aid waited there with a stack of pamphlets that had survived so many hands they were translucent. She smiled like someone trying to turn a match into a lantern. "I'm Becca," she said, in a Spanish that belonged to textbooks and good intentions. "I have 10 minutes. 10 minutes is how long it takes to decide the rest of a life, and also how long you can speak without crying if you do not look up. She asked me the right questions. Dates, schools, work, leases, community ties, medical expenses, and the wrong ones the form insisted on, why I overstayed. Whether I understood the consequences of my own poverty, whether I knew that mistakes do not excuse other mistakes, even when both belong to the same hungry week. I answered cleanly because women who clean learn how to remove what others think is stain, but is really story. When we finished, she circled a line on a sheet. "There's a stay we can request," she said. "Unlikely to process before your removal, but sometimes unlikely is the only door open," I said, and she nodded, weary alive. "I'll file it. It will help later, even if it doesn't help now." She looked at Miguelito, who had taken his folded letter out again and was tracing its edges. "What's that?" "For the man who decides," he said, and the innocence in his voice made her swallow a thought. "Sometimes paper is heavier than it looks," she said to me, and I knew she meant both kinds. When we were led back to the main room, Hayes was standing by the desk with a file in his hand, and that look men get when their day has already said too much. He glanced up, saw us, and something in his face, its gravity maybe, shifted a degree. "I'll call you in a bit," he said, almost apologizing to the air. We sat. The air returned to its worsening. Carla leaned closer, voice a ribbon that refused to fray. "He has the look," she said. "Which look?" "The look of a man who has a mother," she answered, and we both almost smiled like thieves grating the guard. An hour later, a commotion began at the intake door. A chain-link rattle of keys, the scrape of a cart, a burst of voices that didn't yet know which ones were allowed to be loud. New arrivals. One woman staggered in with lipstick too bright for this room and eyes that had closed around a picture only she could see. She clutched a plastic bag with her belt and shoelaces in it, the way dignity gets measured in laces once they take them away. I wanted to stand and give her my seat, and before I could, Carla was already up, a blanket appearing from nowhere like love's own contraband. Guards pretended not to watch. A kindness performed publicly is a kind of civil disobedience in here. It dares the rules to say their names out loud. Miguelito tugged my sleeve. "Now?" he mouthed, showing his small square of paper. I shook my head. His mouth turned down. Then he straightened, as if he had decided to do something harder than obey me. "Bathroom," he whispered. We are taught to fear the smallest distances in rooms like this. I wanted to tie him to my wrist. A guard walked him to the door and waited outside. I could see his feet under the stall. He was gone a long minute, then 2, then 3, and I was on my own feet when the door opened and he came out, dry-eyed and taller somehow. The guard brought him back with a shrug that said, "Boys," a universal language that survives any border. Miguelito climbed up beside me, breath steady now. "What did you do?" I whispered. He leaned into my shoulder in the way that delivers secrets without letting them touch air. "I hid it where cleaning ladies don't have to clean," he said. "Where?" "Under the metal thing that makes the towels," he said, paper towel dispenser, behind the loose screw. "People who work find things. He will, if he is a worker." And I realized, stunned and proud and a little afraid, that my son had written a letter to a stranger and then sent it into the unseen system of women who keep buildings from falling down. He had trusted the network I belonged to more than the one that owned the locks. I kissed his hair, and it smelled like the cheap soap they give you here and the lemon of last night's memory. The afternoon crawled toward evening like it had lost its purpose. Somebody somewhere made the decision to turn the TV to a cooking show. The host laughed while cutting onions, as if this were a trick only she had learned. Carla told me about her boy in Bakersfield who thinks she is working in a hotel, and I told her about the blue door in my son's drawing, and how we painted it that color because my mother said blue tells the sky we are neighbors. "Maybe the sky will vouch for us," she said, and I wanted to believe her. A buzzer sounded, a door opened, names were called like lottery numbers in a cruel game. "Ramirez, Lucia," a voice said. Not cruel, not kind, just employed. I stood. Miguelito stood with me, his small body reading mine like a script. As we approached the desk, Hayes stepped away from the glass and into our space, that small act of men who want to be human in rooms that train them otherwise. He held our file, and I saw it marked with yellow, the color bureaucracy uses when it pretends to be urgent. "Mrs. Ramirez," he said, and his voice told me he had not been in charge of his own heart all day. "Can you wait here a moment? I need to retrieve something." He didn't wait for permission. He moved with a purpose that made the guard at the corner pretend to sip coffee harder. He disappeared down the hall, the same hall that held the bathroom where my son had trusted the universe of screws and dispensers, and women with keys no one notices. He was gone for 1 minute. 3. 5. I held the edge of the desk to remind the floor who I was. When he returned, he had a single folded paper in his hand. Damp crease, graphite smudge at the corner, the exact gray of my boy's pencil. He didn't unfold it yet. He looked at Miguelito, then at me, then at the paper again, as if he were deciding which prayer belongs to which. "I found this behind a loose screw," he said, searching my face for either guilt or relief and finding both. "It says, 'For the man who decides.'" He glanced toward the camera in the ceiling, then turned his body so its eye saw only his back. "May I?" My throat said yes before my head could counsel caution. He opened it slowly, like paper can bruise too, and read. His face changed in the ways men's faces change when the simplest words end their arguments. Then he folded it back and pressed his palm flat over it, like he was stopping a small bird from flying away too soon. He cleared his throat, professional, and turned to the guard. I'm moving this case to deferred action review. Print me the intake for an RFE and a stay, and flag the renewal receipt for supervisor sign-off. He didn't look at me while he performed the spell that makes bureaucracy remember it once had a soul. He looked at the boy who had smuggled a letter past doubt. The guard blinked, recalibrating to a new weather. Yes, sir. Hayes finally met my eyes. Take a seat. I'll need time, he said, and then softer, so only I could hear it. And courage. He returned to his office with the letter like a candle he didn't want the wind to have. I sat. Miguelito leaned against me and let out a long, trembling breath that emptied a week of nights. Did he read it? He asked. He is reading it still, I said, and I understood the truth of it as I said it. Some letters are not words. They are mirrors. Around us the room did not change, and yet it had. The same walls, the same hum, the same TV pretending onions are not reasons to cry, but something had shifted 1 degree toward human. Carla squeezed my shoulder as she walked past to calm a new arrival. I told you, she said, lightning quick. He has a mother. I watched the closed office door glow brighter with the ugly light it had been given. And for the first time I could imagine the hinges learning another job, not only to close, but to open when the right name was spoken. I put my hand over my son's small fist and felt the folded outline of a letter that was no longer there, that had already begun to do its work in a room where mercy is rarely on the schedule. And in that moment, I realized the beginning had finally chosen a place to stand. Not the day I crossed, not the day the visa died, but the day a child wrote to a stranger and believed the stranger was still available for grace. The letter sat on my desk for hours before I dared to read it again. I'm supposed to process hundreds of cases a week, and still there it was. One folded page that somehow weighed more than every file in the cabinet. I could have filed it away as evidence or misplaced property, but that felt like betraying something sacred. When I first read it, my pulse changed. The boy's handwriting was clumsy and wide, like he had written it sitting on his knees. Dear man who decides, my name is Miguel, but my mom calls me Miguelito, because she says I'm still her small one even when I'm big inside. My mom didn't do anything bad. She works hard and gives people food when they are hungry. She tells me when you do the right thing, even when it's scary, that's what brave means. Please let her stay. I don't want her to cry anymore. I will help pay if you tell me how much it costs. I promise I will be good. Thank you, sir. Your friend, Miguelito. I must have read it 10 times before the words stopped blurring. Every line came with a sound. A heartbeat, a tremor, the ghost of a child's voice whispering through the metal vents of this place. I'd been at the agency long enough to know how cases like this end, by the book, but I also knew the book didn't account for the part of a person that breaks silently. When I finally looked up, the sun had shifted across the blinds, slicing my desk into squares of light and shadow. Outside my office window, the desert shimmered, pretending to be calm. I had forgotten what calm really looked like. Lucia was sitting in the waiting area, her son asleep on her lap again. She looked smaller than she had that morning, but her shoulders were still upright. That quiet kind of dignity people wear when they've run out of defenses, but not of faith. Her hand kept brushing her son's hair like she was checking he was still real. I stepped out. Mrs. Ramirez. She looked up immediately. The fear in her eyes wasn't loud, it was patient. The kind that knows bad news has a shape before it has a name. I'd like to talk again, I said. Just a few questions. Carla. The older woman beside her leaned closer and murmured, Go. Maybe this one listens. Lucia followed me into the interview room. Miguelito's hand still tangled with hers. I motioned for them to sit. You're from Chihuahua? Yes, she said cautiously. But my son was born in Texas. His father... She hesitated. He left before Miguelito could walk. Do you have family in the States? My sister, Rosa. She cleans houses in Houston. She helps when she can. I nodded, pretending to make notes. But the truth was, I wasn't listening for facts anymore. I was listening for the rhythm beneath her words. That fragile pulse of someone who has built her life out of borrowed time and still calls it hers. When they left, I stayed. The room felt heavy with everything people had said before her. Excuses, tears, anger, silence. But none of those had come with a letter. I kept it beside my keyboard, unable to file it. The rules said I should attach it to her case as unsolicited correspondence. But the rules didn't say what to do when a 7-year-old boy writes, Please tell me how much it costs to keep my mother. I thought of my own mother then. The night she died, I had been halfway across the country in a training session. I didn't make it back in time. She used to tell me, Daniel, when you hold a person's papers in your hand, you hold their story too. I hadn't understood what she meant until years later, sitting behind a desk that turned names into numbers. Now her voice was back, clear and steady. Don't forget what you're holding. I took the letter and slipped it into my jacket pocket before heading to the director's office. The corridor smelled like disinfectant and fear. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. My supervisor, Miller, was already shouting at someone on the phone when I arrived. No, we don't have capacity for appeals. File it and move on, he barked, then noticed me. Hayes, you look like you've seen a ghost. Maybe I have, I said. He raised an eyebrow. Another sob story? I hesitated. Something like that. He sighed and gestured to the pile of folders on his desk. You've been here long enough to know the rules. Sympathy slows the system. It's not sympathy, I said. It's sense. Same thing. Dangerous for efficiency. I set Lucia's file on his desk, open to the summary page. Her son's a U.S. citizen. She's been here over a decade, steady job, no criminal record, tax receipts from her employer. She qualifies for deferred action, Miller shrugged. And she'll get it. Once her case number comes up. Meanwhile, the flight leaves tomorrow. I stared at him. You're deporting a mother before verifying a renewal that's already filed? He leaned back. That's above my pay grade. Orders came from Washington last month. No exceptions without clearance. You want to lose your badge over one woman? I didn't answer. Exactly, he said, turning back to his screen. Do the paperwork, Hayes. That's your job. But that night, I couldn't. I stayed in the office after everyone left, the hum of the ventilation filling the space where conscience usually hides. I reread the letter under the desk lamp until the ink seemed to move, alive in the light. Some part of me wanted to believe this was about justice, but it wasn't. It was about memory, about my mother's hands folding laundry at midnight, about her voice saying, "You can follow orders, Daniel, but don't forget your heart reports to someone else." I printed the case file, scanned the visa receipts, and opened an internal request for a case hold due to administrative review. It was risky. The system flags anomalies automatically. If Miller found out, he'd have me reassigned to warehouse duty by sunrise. But the request bought time. Maybe 72 hours, maybe less. When I finally left the office, dawn was already bruising the edge of the desert. The next morning, Lucia and Miguelito were moved to a smaller cell. They looked confused but hopeful. I had told the guard on duty that their case was under review. That phrase, under review, sounds official enough to keep questions quiet. When I walked past, Miguelito ran up to the bars and smiled. "Did you read it?" he whispered, eyes wide like he was meeting a magician. "I did," I said softly. "And it was very brave." He nodded solemnly, then handed me a drawing. 2 stick figures holding hands under a sun. "That's you and my mom," he said. "Because you listened?" The guard shouted for him to step back, but I couldn't stop smiling. "Thank you, Miguel," I said. "That's the best evidence I've seen all week." Lucia's eyes met mine then, full of something I didn't deserve. Trust. "Thank you, officer," she said quietly, "for reading what matters." I wanted to tell her the truth, that I hadn't fixed anything yet, that bureaucracy is a machine that eats good intentions for breakfast. But I couldn't. Not yet. By midday, Miller summoned me again. "Hayes, what's going on with case 417B? I kept my voice even. "Pending verification from USCIS, I submitted a hold." He frowned. "You don't have authorization for that. Her renewal receipt is valid." "I'm following protocol. You're bending it. There's a difference." He slammed a pen down. "I don't care how sad their stories are, Hayes. You can't save everyone." "I'm not trying to save everyone," I said quietly. "Just the ones worth saving." He stared at me for a long moment, then said, "You're getting sentimental. That's how good officers become ex-officers." Maybe he was right. But that night, when I drove home, I didn't feel like an officer. I felt like a man who had been reminded what it means to be human. At home, I placed Miguelito's letter on the kitchen table beside my mother's photo. Her face smiled out from the frame, eyes full of that same patient strength I'd seen in Lucia. "Tell me what to do, Mom," I whispered. The wind outside rattled the window slightly, and it almost sounded like her voice. "You already know." The next morning, I filed the formal request to delay Lucia's deportation for humanitarian review. I forged Miller's signature. It wasn't the first time I'd broken a rule, but it was the first time it felt righteous. When I handed the papers to the officer at processing, she raised an eyebrow. "You sure about this, Hayes?" "Absolutely." "Then it's your name on it?" "I know." She nodded. "You've got 48 hours before the system catches up." That was enough. I walked back to the detention wing. Lucia was sitting by the window, holding Miguelito's hand as he slept again. She looked up when I entered. "You'll stay a little longer?" I said quietly. "Your case is being reviewed again. Does that mean—" "It means someone's finally reading the right things." Tears welled in her eyes. "Thank you, Officer Hayes." I shook my head. "Just Daniel," she smiled faintly. "Then thank you, Daniel." And as I turned to leave, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't afraid of what would happen next. Because sometimes, doing what's right is the only thing that makes you feel alive. The desert sun rose mean and white, flattening every shadow, bleaching color out of uniforms. Walls, faces, even hope. I had been at the office since before 6, the taste of old coffee still clinging to my mouth, my pulse already one step ahead of my body. 48 hours. That's what the clerk said. 48 hours before the system caught up to the lie, I told to give a woman and her son more time to exist. Lucia and Miguelito were still in holding, but now they had a small blanket, a shared sandwich from a sympathetic guard, a little air that didn't cut as hard. I passed their door every couple of hours pretending to check security lights, and every time the same thing happened. She looked up and nodded once, nothing dramatic, just a signal that said, "We're still here." It was enough fuel for the day. By noon, Miller called me in. "Sit," he said, voice like gravel dragged across a metal tray. "You've been busy." I kept my face calm. "I've been doing my job." "Funny, your job suddenly includes humanitarian reviews with forged signatures?" My stomach went cold. "Who told you?" "The computer," he said. "Our system doesn't like heroes." He threw the printed request across the desk. My own handwriting stared back at me in black ink, each letter a confession. "Miller, Don't," he snapped. "I've seen this before. New officers think they can outfeel the system." "You're not the first." "I'm not new," I said quietly. "I'm just not numb." He laughed once, short and dry. "You think this is a movie? You save one mother, you'll have 10 more lined up tomorrow holding pictures of kids who look like that boy. Then what? You'll sign them all?" "If I have to, you'll lose your badge." "I can live without a badge." He leaned forward, eyes hard. "Can you live without a roof? Without income? You've got bills, Hayes. Don't act like you don't." His words landed like stones, heavy, familiar. "You told me once this job was about protecting families," I said. "You just never said which ones." He stared at me for a long beat, then leaned back, exhaling through his teeth. "You've got until the end of today to reverse it," he said finally. "Cancel the hold." "I'll pretend I didn't see this. I didn't move." "Do it, Hayes. Don't make me write you up." I stood. "You can write what you want." "I'm not undoing it." For a moment, he looked almost tired, like he'd once believed in something too. "You're throwing your career away for a stranger." "No," I said. "For a child." I walked out before he could answer. The hallway seemed narrower than before. Every camera felt like an eye that knew too much. I found myself in the processing wing again, standing in front of Lucia's cell. She looked up. "Daniel, pack your things," I said quietly. Her eyes widened. "Are they—" "Not yet," I interrupted. "But I'm getting you out of here." She stared at me, frozen between disbelief and hope. "How?" I filed a stay. "It won't last forever, but long enough to get you a hearing. You'll have a lawyer. A real one." Her lips parted, but no sound came. Finally, she whispered, "Why are you doing this?" I swallowed hard. "Because your son reminded me who I was before this job told me to forget." She covered her mouth with her hand. I saw the tears start, small and fast. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing us." Miguelito tugged at my sleeve through the bars. "Are we going home?" "Soon," I said. "But you'll need to be brave a little longer." He nodded solemnly. "I can be brave." Back in my office, I printed the release forms. Each page sounded like thunder when it hit the tray. Bureaucracy may move slow, but paper still knows how to shout. I signed the bottom lines with a hand that didn't shake only because it had stopped feeling anything years ago. When I stepped into the hallway, Miller was there again. He didn't speak. He just watched me walk past, his jaw tight, his silence heavier than a threat. By 3, I had arranged a transport van to take Lucia and her son to a family shelter in El Paso. I told the guards they were being moved for case reevaluation. It wasn't a lie, not exactly. It was just the kind of truth that survives inside rules by learning to whisper. When I went to fetch them, Lucia was already standing, clutching the small backpack that held everything she owned. Miguelito held her hand, eyes bright but cautious. As we walked through the corridor, people looked up from their benches. The other women, the guards, the clerks, some out of curiosity, some out of quiet envy. Carla caught my eye and gave me a small nod, as if she were blessing the road. At the exit checkpoint, the officer on duty raised an eyebrow. "Transfer papers?" I handed them over. He scanned them, frowned, then shrugged. "You're clear." Van's waiting outside. The desert light hit us like heat from a furnace. Lucia blinked, shielding her son's eyes. It was the first sunlight they'd seen in days. "Where will we go?" she asked softly. "There's a shelter run by volunteers," I said. "They'll give you food, beds, help with your case." "And you?" she asked. "I'll check in. I promise." She turned to face me fully then, something fierce and fragile in her expression. "You're a good man, Daniel Hayes." I almost laughed. I'm just a man who finally decided to listen. That night, after they were gone, I drove aimlessly through the border roads until the desert turned purple. The radio stayed off. My badge sat on the passenger seat, heavier than usual. I knew Miller would file the report first thing in the morning. I knew my clearance could be gone by noon, but for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like guilt. It felt like freedom. When I got home, there was a voicemail waiting, an unfamiliar number from the El Paso shelter. "Officer Hayes," a woman's voice said. "Lucia and her son arrived safely. The boy wanted us to tell you he drew you another picture." He said, "Tell the man who decides that he decided right." I sat there for a long time, the message replaying until my phone went dark. The next day, I walked into Miller's office before he could summon me. "If you're going to fire me," I said, "do it now." He didn't look surprised. He just leaned back and sighed. "The higher-ups flagged your paperwork, yes. They'll probably reassign you. Border logistics, maybe Arizona." "That's fine." He tilted his head. "You don't seem worried." "I'm not," I said. I made peace with it. He studied me for a long second, then said, You remind me of myself 20 years ago. I pulled strings for a woman once, too. She was deported anyway. Don't mistake small wins for miracles." "I'm not," I said. "But sometimes small wins are the only ones that matter." He nodded, half defeated, half respectful. "Get out of my office, Hayes." I did. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. 3 days later, an envelope arrived at my apartment with no return address. Inside was a drawing, me standing beside a stick figure woman and a boy under a blue sky. At the bottom, written in a child's careful print, it said, "Thank you for giving us more tomorrows." I held it for a long time before pinning it to my refrigerator. No medal, no badge, no citation would ever mean more. The first thing I remember about that morning was the sound of birds. Real birds, not the mechanical ones trapped inside airport terminals or barbed fences, but alive, free, indifferent to borders. Their chirping drifted through the cracked window of the shelter room, mixing with the faint hum of coffee brewing somewhere nearby. For a moment, it almost felt like home. Miguelito was the first to stir. He yawned, hair sticking up in every direction, his small fingers tracing the patch on the blanket that said Hope Center, El Paso. "Mama," he murmured. "Are we safe now?" The question landed softly, but it pressed every bruise on my soul. I brushed a strand of hair from his forehead and smiled. "For now, mi amor," I said. "We're safe for now." But in my heart, I knew safety here was a borrowed thing. Like sunlight through a barred window, beautiful but never guaranteed. The shelter was run by nuns and volunteers, the kind of people who carried their kindness like armor. There were women from Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, all of us bound by the same invisible thread of almost. Almost citizens, almost legal, almost forgotten. We spent our days waiting for news, papers, hearings, signatures that could bend our lives toward freedom or throw them back into exile. Every afternoon, a volunteer read names from a clipboard like a lottery draw. Each name called meant another soul had been seen, even briefly. One morning, she said, "Lucia Ramirez." My breath caught. "Your case has been assigned for hearing next week," she said. "The officer on your file pushed it through." I felt my knees tremble. "The officer?" She nodded. "A Mr. Hayes." It was the first time in months that the word officer didn't sound like danger. The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. The nun, Sister Anne, helped me gather everything. School letters from Miguelito's teachers, pay stubs, references from employers, even a note from the family I used to clean for. She said, "The judge doesn't just need proof. He needs reason to believe you belong here." I whispered, "My son is reason enough." She smiled, touching my arm. "Then make him your testimony." The courtroom was smaller than I imagined. 4 walls and a flag, too bright under the light. Miguelito sat beside me in his cleanest shirt, the one Sister Anne had ironed until it looked like respect. Across the room, a government attorney shuffled papers. And beside the judge, to my disbelief, stood Officer Daniel Hayes. He wasn't in uniform this time. Just a simple gray suit, but somehow it made him look more official. Maybe because this time he wasn't speaking for a system. He was speaking for a family. When he caught my eye, he gave a small nod, almost imperceptible. My throat tightened. The judge, a tired-looking man with half-moon glasses, adjusted his files. "Mrs. Ramirez, you're requesting cancellation of removal under humanitarian grounds. Officer Hayes, you've submitted a supporting statement?" "Yes, Your Honor," Daniel said, voice steady. "I reviewed Mrs. Ramirez's case personally. Her record is spotless, she has maintained employment, and her child is a U.S. citizen. The delay in her visa renewal was administrative, not neglectful," the attorney interjected. "Still, Your Honor, the policy requires—" Daniel didn't let him finish. "With respect, sir, policy isn't law, and law isn't blind. It listens, or it should." The judge frowned but didn't interrupt. "Continue." Daniel took a breath and reached into his folder. My heart stopped when I saw what he held. It was Miguelito's letter, the same folded page with the smudge at the corner. "With your permission, Your Honor," he said, "I'd like to read something written by the minor involved in this case." The courtroom fell silent. Even the air seemed to pause. He unfolded the paper carefully and began to read. I closed my eyes, listening to my son's small, trembling words in Daniel's steady voice. "Dear man who decides, my name is Miguel, but my mom calls me Miguelito because she says I'm still her small one even when I'm big inside. My mom didn't do anything bad." I felt tears hot on my cheeks before he even reached the end, when he read the last line. "I will help pay if you tell me how much it costs. I promise I will be good." The judge put down his pen and rubbed his forehead. For a long time, no one spoke. Then the judge said quietly, "Sometimes, the simplest letters carry the loudest truth." He looked at me. "Mrs. Ramirez, do you have anything to add?" I stood, my knees unsteady. "Only this," I said softly. My son already said it better than I ever could. "We don't want special treatment, just a chance to live the life we started here. The life that already belongs to him." The judge's eyes softened. "I'll take this under advisement." And just like that, the hearing was over. We waited in the hallway, the kind of waiting that makes minutes feel like verdicts. Miguelito clung to my arm, whispering, "Do you think he liked it?" I smiled through the tears. "He heard it, mi amor. That's enough." Then Daniel stepped out of the courtroom, his expression unreadable. "Well?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "He signed it." I blinked. "Signed what?" "Your release. You're staying, Lucia. You and Miguelito are free." For a moment, I didn't move. I just stared at him, the words too big to fit inside me. Then I reached for his hand, the one that had held our letter, our lives, and whispered, "Thank you." He shook his head. "Don't thank me. Thank your son. He wrote the kind of truth that laws can't ignore." Miguelito grinned. "So, we can go home?" "Yes," Daniel said softly. "You can finally go home." That evening, we stood outside the shelter under a pink and gold sky. The air smelled of tortillas and traffic and freedom. Miguelito ran circles around me, laughing, the kind of laughter that only children and forgiven people know how to make. Daniel walked up quietly. He looked tired but lighter. "You'll have a follow-up hearing in a year," he said. "But you'll have papers by then." "I'll make sure of it," I nodded. "What about you?" He smiled faintly. "I'm being transferred." "Because of us?" He shrugged. "Maybe, but some places need people who still remember what mercy sounds like." I felt something ache in my chest. Gratitude, sadness, everything at once. "You're a good man, Daniel Hayes." He looked at me, eyes reflecting the dying sunlight. "No, Lucia, I'm just a man who read the right letter at the right time." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "Your son left this on my desk. Said I should give it to you after court." Inside was another note, this one written in blue crayon. Dear Mom, now you don't have to cry anymore. The man who decides isn't scary. He's just like the people you help. Maybe God sends helpers in uniform sometimes? I couldn't speak. I just pulled Miguelito into my arms and held him until the sky turned dark. A week later, Daniel called one last time. They approved the humanitarian visa, he said. It's official now. You're staying. I laughed through my tears. And you? I'm heading to Arizona. Training new officers. Then teach them to listen, I said. I will, he promised. Tell Miguelito I kept his letter. It reminds me why I still wear this badge. Months passed. Life slowly learned how to be ordinary again. Miguelito started school, made friends, forgot nightmares. I found work cleaning offices downtown. Every morning I packed his lunch and whispered, "For the brave boy who changed everything." Sometimes, when the wind blows hard from the desert, I still think of Daniel, of the man who broke a rule so that my son could keep his mother. And every night before bed, I whisper the words that have become our prayer: borders can divide the land, but not the love that crosses it.